So this is what my final drawing ended up looking like. I thought I might try to record me finishing it up, but really it took so long that it would have been probably a 3-hour video to show you the whole thing in the drawing. But the good thing about me pushing it this far is that I realized that getting a likeness is so much harder than I was imagining it would be. So what I'm going to do is revise my expectations from you for this final project, and I am not expecting it necessarily to have a likeness of you, but things that I want to have you focus on is maintaining human proportions. So these should look as if they could be a real person proportion wise. It doesn't need to be super as rendered as mine is, but I do want the size of the eyes, the placement of the nose, the size of the neck to seem like it is humanly possible to have those kind of proportions. You should not end up looking like a manga character or some sort of cartoony kind of character. So that I think is a lot more achievable than trying to get a likeness. So I've changed point number 3 on my steps here. And instead of focusing so much on getting a likeness, I want you to focus more on just kind of capturing the sense of light and shadow. And we're using the same principles that we used when we drew the sphere, when we drew the fabric drawings, when you're drawing your still lifes with cast shadows and reflected light. So things I want to point out on my drawing that I want you to look for are eliminating outline. So this is the same thing we've been doing for all of our charcoal drawings, trying to get rid of that black outline that makes things feel flat. So if you notice in my jaw here, I don't have a big black outline separating my neck from my jaw. I just was trying to be really careful. I spent most of my time while I was drawing with my eyes squinted because what I wanted to do was make sure that I wasn't losing those big shapes of light and shadow. So I'd squint my eyes at my drawing, and I'd have my photocopy right nearby, and I kept squinting and squinting to make sure I wasn't making, like at one point I had erased some of the whites in the eye, and that eye was really popping out, and so I had to go back in and add more charcoal there. So I kept squinting so that this whole half of the face stayed in shadow, even the parts that have some more subtle reflected light. I needed to make sure that those reflected lights were not competing with the areas of direct light. So my brightest whites were along here. Another thing I want to point out that may help you get a more realistic sense of volume on, especially the nose and the chin. That's a really hard thing to do when they're coming straight out at you and you're not seeing them profile, is looking for a slightly darker area that creates a shadow core. So we've got a little bit darker area here. There's some darks that, especially at the tip of the nose, you should look for a little bit of a shadow core toward the very tip of the nose. And in order to make that feel like it's where the planes change from the undercut of the nose to the top plane of the nose, it's nice to have a little bit of reflected light on the underside of the nose. So keep it subtle, keep it grouping with the shadows. It should not be so bright that it looks like direct light is hitting that part of your face. But if you have this reflected light on the underplane of the nose, a little bit darker shadow core going up the nose. My lighting is from the side. If you have front lighting, it's going to change things a little bit, but you're still going to look for those various planes of the nose. So in this case, I have the brightest light in this kind of triangular shape on sort of the ramp leading up to the plane of my nose. The front plane of the nose is actually where the shadow core is from my point of view, since I have side lighting. And then on the opposite side, there's a second ramp leading down to my other cheek, and that's reflected light. So I've got bright light on one side, kind of a darker shadow core on the front plane of the nose, and then on the plane that's sloping away, we've got reflected light. So that gives a little bit more volume to the nose. You don't want to draw a big black outline all the way around the nose, or it's going to seem like it's a paper mask that's been cut out and that nose is sort of flapping out towards us. So we really want it to feel more like it's a sculpted plane changes with different light on each plane. The other thing I was looking for is I was trying to make this face feel really round, is I was trying to find a shadow core that went pretty much from top to bottom on the face. So if you have a real distinct light source, like in my version, this got a little bit washed out because I was trying to brighten it enough that I could see the reflected light. But I had another version that was a little bit more gray tone, and I could see that there was a brighter highlight sort of along this corner of my face. So the brightest light on the nose is like right on the the point where the front of my nose meets the side plane. It's not the whole side plane, but there was a slightly brighter highlight right here. That highlight also continues onto my top lip. It continues onto this side of my lips. So this side doesn't have much bright light on it. The direct light was still hitting this side. And it continues down onto the chin. So the lights travel all the way up. Here it kind of zigzags over and it hits like this corner. Oops, well, I mean, with the light here, it would be sort of this corner of my face where the side plane meets the front plane. Mine all got pretty washed out because I was using this photo as a reference, but it might be nice to have a little bit more tone on the side plane so that the highlight really feels like it's just coming down that corner of my face, corner of my cheek, and onto my chin there. And then I did get some bright light on the neck as well. And then the shadow core, so we've got the highlight on one side, and then the shadow core has to kind of follow down the other side. And because my forehead is such a big, gentle, rolling plane, that shadow core is pretty wide right here. Here it kind of gets broken up a little bit because of my knit brow, but I see the shadow core again on the left, sort of the front corner of my nose, and then it comes down. I see the shadow core here, like at the little divot on my lip, and then this side plane is quite a bit darker. So we've got a light plane of triangle light here, a darker plane over here, and then the shadow follows down here, and there's a subtle plane change here. So because my lip like angles back and then comes back out again at my chin, this is kind of an undercut plane where there's a little bit of reflected light hitting there, and then the chin curves out again, which allows a little bit of light to transfer there, and then the shadow core shows up again here. So if you can look for kind of a connected shape of darks that helps separate the reflected light plane from the direct light plane, that's going to give your face a lot more volume, if you can look for that. And then I even was looking in the neck. So again, most of the neck, half of it's pretty much in shadow, half is more or less in light. But even within the shadows, I was trying to find some subtle things, like in order to make my trachea feel like it's not just, I don't want my neck just to feel like it's a cylinder. So I noticed in the trachea here, there's sort of a triangular shape of light here, and there's a corresponding subtle triangular shape of reflected light on the other side, and down the middle is where the shadow core is. And then, you know, I had to work a little bit here to try to figure out the structure of these muscles and tendons at the neck there. And then also even on the shoulders, even though this is a pretty undeveloped area, there's not much work that I put into here, I did want it to feel like my head was casting a shadow onto my shirt here. So this whole side gets some dark, lights sort of raking across the chest plane, and there's a little bit more light here because like the rib cage is slightly rounded, so a little bit more light here, but that's pretty subtle. You know, you can just kind of lift things out like that. As far as the hair goes, I kept it pretty soft focus. So you notice I don't have a very crisp edge here. I even intentionally blurred the ears a little bit so that they are not popping right out near the front of the face. And I wanted most of the focus to be like at the front of the lips, the chin, the tip of the nose, and the eyes tend to get quite a bit of clarity too, just because they have some of the few spots where you can actually see identifiable lines. Almost, even the eyebrows are pretty soft focus. They're not like drawn in like an eyebrow pencil. You know, I ended up taking this little rigid vinyl eraser and kind of feathering back into that area so that it looked like real hair growing rather than like something drawn on or painted on. And at the temples where my hair, you know, blends into my scalp, I feathered across there with this kneaded eraser. And then you can also use a charcoal to kind of make it feel like the hair is really growing out of the scalp and not like it's a wig, like artificially on top with a really crisp edge. So there's a little bit of blending here. I have a little bit of like a cowlick or something that's casting a shadow, so I smeared a little bit of darker values in there to create this kind of like cave of dark. And then just pulling out a little bit of the highlights where the light was hitting a few of these hairs on the front of my face. But again, I didn't draw every single little hair, or then that whole area of the hair gets really flat and patterned, and it seems to be just sort of floating on a flat surface. So really what you're thinking of is trying to think of the skull as a spherical form that's covered by hair, and that hair also has to have light and shadow the same way the sphere itself would. So if you think about, you know, light coming from this side, I should have a few more highlights on this side of the head than I do here. So this was just kind of a smear of charcoal, kept pretty light. My husband's singing.